pieces. The first one is titled Dance of the Yi. It's a contemporary piece that was composed in 1965, and the Yi are an ethnic group of people who live in the south and west of China. The second piece I played for you after I switched the chairs, if you didn't notice that, the second piece I played for you was a traditional piece, Yu Zhou Chang Wan, the Fisherman's Song at Dusk. Although it was composed in 1938, it was still categorized as a traditional piece because it's largely based off an ancient tune. And when I say contemporary music versus traditional music on zither, the traditional pieces are the ones that have been passed down through a largely oral tradition. So even if they were written down on paper, so there are some scores of the music, we don't really know who wrote them or when they actually came about. So those are the traditional pieces. Whereas for the contemporary pieces, I'll be mostly referring to the ones that were written after the establishment of the PRC, so from the 1950s and onwards. And when you think of contemporary music in Western music at least, you might think of modernism or postmodernism, and associate names such as Stravinsky, Schoenberg, John Cage, or some of the living composers to it as well. But these modernism, postmodernist tendencies didn't get incorporated into Chinese music at least until the 1990s. Because for those of you who know Chinese history, 20th century China was pretty turbulent, and there was no room spared for the arts to develop, so China was very late catching on to that train. And Chinese zither music that was written so between the 1950s and 1990s, although it was contemporary, as in it's written, it was written from scratch, it was not based off of a traditional tune or an ancient tune, it still retained a lot of characteristics of traditional Chinese music. So like the formal and melodic conventions are very traditional. The harmonic language tends to be mostly, if not entirely, pentatonic, so it tends to sound still very much like typical Chinese music. Anyways, that's a little bit of history. So moving onwards, we're playing, the next piece will also be a contemporary piece, 雪山春晓, which means spring awakes in the snowy mountains. And the snowy mountains refer to those in Tibet. So you'll hear some Tibetan folk music elements within the next piece. The composer of the next piece, she's Fan Shangge, Madame Fan Shangge. She is one of the first generations of important zitherists in Chinese history, and she's still alive now. She lives in Canada, in fact, in Markham, which is a little satellite city that's a little bit north of Toronto. So if you can't really imagine what spring awakening in the snowy mountains of Tibet are like, imagine spring awakening in Canada. or in Rochester. It's very similar. It's very similar. so what I just did was that since zither is a pentatonically tuned instrument, so all the strings, there are only 5 strings within an octave and are pentatonically tuned. In order to achieve the other notes within a chromatic scale, I have to bend these strings on the side. And what I just did was that I kind of retuned the key of the instrument. Anyways, so the next piece we'll be playing is a traditional piece, 高山流水, the high mountains and flowing waters. There are many versions of this piece. The version that I'll be playing for you is the version from the southern Chinese province of Zhejiang. That's the most famous zither version, but the piece was actually very originally written for the guqin. The guqin is like another very, very ancient pluck string Chinese instrument that is only 7 strings, so it's much thinner and it's much smaller, but that instrument is now like 3,000 years old. Anyway, so the OG version of the high mountains and flowing waters, written for the guqin. That piece was actually launched onto space by NASA on Voyager 1 on the record as a representation of our collective human culture. But anyways, apart from that great feat as done, there's also a story associated with this piece. So there's a legend that says that there is a guqin master whose name is Bo Ya. He is very highly skilled, he's very well acclaimed everywhere he goes, but he was never content or satisfied because he feels like nobody understands his playing. So in order to perfect his skill and to find somebody who would understand his music, he went on to travel around China. This was also like 2,500 years ago. So traveling was not that like simple back then. Anyway, so he was traveling around China and trying to perfect his skill and trying to find somebody who would understand his music. And it was once he was playing at a show, he noticed that a young man was very, very intently listening to his playing. So he played a piece, and at the end of it, the young man cheered and clapped and said, "Oh, that piece was just as magnificent as the high mountains." And Bo Ya was very surprised because that was exactly what he intended in the music. So he played another piece, and at the end of it, that young man once again clapped and cheered and said, "Oh, that piece was just as powerful and free as the flowing waters." And Bo Ya was very delightfully surprised because he has found somebody who understood his music. So he made very good friends with the young man, whose name is Ziqi. Despite that, there was a very large age gap between the two of them. But Bo Ya had to keep on going on his travels, but he promised Ziqi that he will come back to his town and find him once he's done with his travels. So a few years have passed. Bo Ya has returned from his travels to find Ziqi, but he has learned very tragically that Ziqi has died from a disease. So he was not able to see him. And Bo Ya was devastated, so he went to Ziqi's grave and he played once again the high mountains and flowing waters. And at the end of playing the piece, he cried and said, "From now on, nobody in this entire world will be able to understand my music." So he breaks his instrument and plays again. It's a very tragic story indeed. But there is a phrase that came from this story that's still used in modern Chinese, 知音, which literally means understands music or knows music. The true meaning of it is soulmate. Essentially, if you understand my music, then you are my soulmate. 高山流水遇知音, and under the high mountains and the flowing waters, I have found my soulmate. it's not a piece that I play very often. It might be the first time I've ever put it on any program for a reason. I'll tell you about it later. But anyways, this piece is sort of quite a cinematic piece that portrays the scene of a busy harbor that was struck by the typhoon. But then the workers at the harbor were working so hard and fighting so hard to save people's lives and the cargo. And eventually the typhoon subsides and the harbor returns to peace and is busy safe again. This piece was written in 1965 by Madame Wang Changyuan when she was still a student at the Shanghai Conservatoire, and when she was like about 20 years old. And as I said, I'm personally not super fond of the piece because I find it kind of cheesy, to be honest. I'm sorry, Madame Wang Changyuan. And another reason for it is because 1965, again, relating to Chinese history, we're heading towards Cultural Revolution. So I was not particularly fond of the political undertone of the piece. But I still decided to put it on tonight's program anyways, because it's regarded as the first modernist piece of zither music. So not only is it composed from scratch, so that it's not based off of a traditional tune, it utilizes a lot of then very, very new techniques, and some so-called extended techniques. Many of them were invented by Madame Wang Changyuan herself. So you'll hear some very, very scary and loud noise effects used to imitate the sound of the typhoon ravaging through or the sound of the wind. I'm warning you in advance. Don't get scared by those. But here we go on the quest to find a typhoon. I'll be playing for you is an ancient tune, Guangling San, which means the song or the piece of Guangling. Guangling is the ancient city in China that's close to modern day Nanjing, or if you don't know what Nanjing is, it's close to modern day Shanghai. And this ancient piece is once again first written for the Guqin. And the Guqin version is really, really old. The earliest records of the piece date back to, again, 2,500 years ago. And the earliest extant score, the full score that has been found was from about the 1400s. And the original Guqin piece is very long, could be anywhere from like 15 to 20 minutes, depending on interpretation, because it tells a very dramatic story once again. It tells the story of a king who has killed a Guqin player's parents. So this Guqin player swears vengeance to kill the king in return. And this Guqin player, he went and perfected his skills in playing the Guqin and in assassination. And he eventually made a name for himself as a very good Guqin player. So the king was very delighted and invited him to the king's court to play for the king. What he did was that he hid a dagger inside the sound hole of an instrument. So if you don't know what the sound hole looks like, this is the body of the instrument, and the entire part. So this entire part is hollow, which is the soundboard. You can hide a lot of things in there, including a dagger. Anyways, so this Guqin player, he hid the dagger within his instrument in the sound hole, and then went to the king's palace to play. And since he had something within the sound hole, it was sounding a lot quieter than usual. So the king was like, "Oh, come closer, I want to listen to you more." So he took his chance and got close to the king and took the dagger out and stabbed him to death. And he has completed his vengeance for his parents. That's the full story of the piece. I will not play for you the full piece or the full story. I'll be playing for you an excerpt that's transcribed onto the zither by none other than Madame Wang Changyuan, who was the composer of the previous piece. So here we go, Guangling San.
in 20 minutes. More versions. With the extension.
Encore.
I've been told already to add.
Next piece I'll play for you is a traditional piece from the northern province of Shandong. It's called 四段锦, which literally just means a collection of four tunes. The four tunes depict four little scenes, the first one being wind blowing through bamboo leaves, the second one being birds chirping through valleys, the third one a little stream of water, and the last one a celebration. arts movie, adapted from the martial arts novel of the same name by the great and late Hongkongese novelist Jin Yong. 笑傲江湖, The Smiling Proud Wanderer.
by Jet Li.
I guess. I do not know which actor it was, but I just assume so. I would think so. Do you know him?
Why not?
you can give a lecture on this later on, I'm pretty sure. Okay, anyways. By the way, my name is Sunshine. I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is Sunshine. There's a tip box somewhere over there if you would like to leave me something at the end. The next piece and the last piece I'll play for you is a traditional piece from the southern province of Zhejiang. This is 幼儿高, the moon rises high.